This English as an Additional Language language acquisition tutorial is brought to you by the Alberta Professional Learning Consortium. I am Kathy Salmon. I'm currently an educational consultant. Previously, I worked as a sessional instructor for the University of Calgary. I recently retired as a school principal from the Calgary Board of Education, where I served for 22 years. I was also able to be seconded to Alberta Education on 2 occasions where I served as an EAL program manager and had the opportunity to be one of the co-writers for Benchmarks 1.0 and Benchmarks 2.0. The learning intention for this session is for teachers and administrators to build background knowledge on language acquisition theories to support instructional decision-making. There will be 6 parts to this presentation. Part 1, Getting Started. First of all, we'll go over some terminology. ML stands for multilingual. Many of the learners who are acquiring English also know 1 or more languages, therefore they are considered a multilingual. EAL, English as an Additional Language. The A is significant because it's additive. Multilinguals, when learning English, often know more than one language. This replaces the former common term ESL. The S was inaccurate. It was often not true, as multilinguals knew more than one language and/or English wasn't necessarily their second language. ELL, English Language Learner. This term was used to be more inclusive. However, it fails to distinguish an English as an Additional Language learner from monolingual English speakers who are also learning English. Some of the information for this tutorial can be found on the Supporting English Language Learners website on Learn Alberta. Click on the word source to be linked to the website Supporting English Language Learners, featured on image number 1. Then click on the Programming and Instruction tab, featured on image number 2. And then click on Understanding the Acquisition of English as an Additional Language, featured on image 3. This self-reflection tool can be found on the Supporting English Language Learners website at Alberta Education. Pause the video and take a few moments to reflect on your understanding of the acquisition of English as an additional language. Part 2, Vocabulary. Here is an opportunity to make connections. How many words do students know when they enter kindergarten? How many words do students learn each year? How many words do students know when they graduate high school? Pause the video and think about your answers to those questions. For children that have been read to, they know about 5,000 words when they enter kindergarten, although they've been exposed to many, many more in language-rich homes. When students graduate high school, they know about 50,000 words. That's because they learn between 3,000 and 3,500 words each year. That's a lot of vocabulary. Another source also verifies that children learn between 2,000 and 3,500 words each year. The average American, who is 39 years old, has a vocabulary of about 29,000 words, which means that the average American reads at the grade 7 to 8 level. This chart is just an example of the vocabulary that you'd know at different ages using the information from the previous chart. So have a look at the grade you teach and consider the amount of words that the average child would learn or come to know during that school year. And also consider that the resources that you're using, if they are for that particular grade, would be using that amount of words. So we want to then consider that English as an Additional Language learners, if they are at the beginning level, would be below that number of words, and we would then need to scaffold and support them and build their background knowledge and close that word gap. Over time, it would take anywhere from 5 to 7 years to close that language gap for English as an Additional Language learners, because they would not only have to learn those 3,500 words per year, but they'd have to learn more. And anyone who's a multilingual speaker would be learning that amount of words in both languages potentially. So that's a lot of word learning. Here is another connection opportunity. Pause the video and think about what it means to know a word. Knowing a word is complicated. You have to recognize it when it's spoken, be able to pronounce it, understand if it's been commonly used, know an underlying meaning or two, the typical words it's associated with, be able to use it both receptively and productively, and to be able to use it in many contexts. But wait, there's more. Knowing a word means knowing the range of meanings, related words and synonyms, some collocations, the limits of words where it can and can't be used, the affixes commonly associated with the word, the grammatical patterns of where the word is used and how it is used, to be able to decode it when reading and understand it too, and also to be able to spell it and use it appropriately in writing. Knowing a word sure has a lot of aspects to it. Here's another opportunity to pause and reflect. If there's that many words to know and there's that many aspects to word knowledge, how do teachers provide instruction and practice with vocabulary to have them know the words? And how does vocabulary relate to language proficiency? Part 3, Language Proficiency. This chart is from the English as an Additional Language Learning benchmarks that show the stages of proficiency from emerging literacy A and B to level 6. This shows stages of beginner, intermediate, and advanced proficiency through pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, to grade 1, to grades 2-3, grades 4-6, grades 7-9, and grades 10-12. This chart aligns the stages of language acquisition to the Alberta EAL proficiency benchmarks. Stage 1 and 2 are similar to a beginning proficiency level, which take between 6 months and 2 years to acquire. Stages 3 and 4 are similar to the intermediate proficiency level, which can take between 1, 3, or 5 years to acquire. Stage 5 is similar to the advanced proficiency level, which can take 5 to 7 or longer to acquire. This slide shows 3 images. We've seen 1 and 2 before. Number 1 is the vocabulary by grade. Number 2 is the EAL proficiency benchmarks. Number 3 is new. It shows the range of vocabulary words by the benchmarks grade range. It gives you an idea of what a beginner might know to an intermediate and advanced within that particular grade range. This next section will explore beginning, intermediate, and advanced proficiency levels. For beginning proficiency students, they may be in the silent period, which means they may want to observe and listen rather than produce language. For some learners, this silent period may go on for a while. However, there are some beginning language proficiency learners who are risk takers and will not have a silent period. The majority of beginning proficiency learners understand better when visual supports are given, such as gestures, images, and actions. Most often, they will understand language related to the routines and social exchanges that they are familiar with, as well as the common phrases and expressions that are used in context. Sometimes they may have limited understanding of individual words or sentence structures. Often, EAL learners have a higher receptive understanding in listening and reading than their productive understanding, which is speaking and writing. Beginning proficiency students will be able to repeat what they have heard, and sometimes with little or no understanding. Parroting and copying language use in context is one of the ways that English as additional language learners learn to use the language appropriately. They will often copy written words if they've already learned to write in another language. They will usually be able to respond to prompts with visual supports, and will often accompany their verbal language with nonverbal gestures and actions to help convey their meaning. They will use familiar words and phrases, and sometimes speak in 1 to 2 word utterances, short memorized phrases, and short or simple sentences in the present tense. There will often be memorized chunks with usage errors, and sometimes overgeneralization will occur where there is an overuse of S and ED, like I goaded or I wents. The intermediate language proficiency level can last between 1 and 5 years. Therefore, depending on the complexity and the grade level, you may notice the students do the following. They may have good comprehension, especially in social interactions with familiar topics. With academic interactions, when topics and contexts are familiar, they may demonstrate good comprehension. However, they still may need intermediate level scaffolds and supports when the contexts are new or there's unfamiliar academic topics. Typically, they will understand the common figurative language and idiomatic expressions, and understand complex texts and still require some visual supports. On the productive side, intermediate language learners will communicate using simple, detailed sentences and experiment with more complex and varied sentences. This means they may have occasional word usage errors. They will often ask and answer questions to clarify and confirm understanding, and initiate and engage quite comfortably in conversations with their peers. And they will make frequent grammar, word use, and pronunciation errors as they're experimenting and expanding with their language. As advanced English as an additional language learners approach native-like proficiency, they may still need 1 to 2 years of advanced language supports, such as precise vocabulary words and more advanced connector and transition words to convey more advanced messages using complex and varied sentence structure. They will effectively understand and use a broad range of vocabulary in context, understand a range of idiomatic expressions and cultural references, which means they can understand applied humor and use figurative language appropriately in context. They may continue to translate between English and their home language at the advanced level. This use of translanguaging is to confirm their knowledge and understanding both in English and their home language. And advanced learners who are bilingual will typically go fluidly back and forth between the two languages at a high level. Advanced English as an additional language proficiency learners will have a similar level of language proficiency and academic achievement as their English-speaking peers, which means they will be asking and answering questions to clarify and confirm understanding, and be using more complex sentences in their speaking and writing, and create those texts with fewer grammatical and word usage errors. Some EAL learners may speak English with an accent, which is expected and accepted. English is spoken the world over with a variety of dialects and accents. We want to support our EAL learners to be comprehensible. Part 4. Social and Academic Language, Cummins BICS and CALP. Here's another opportunity to make a connection. Is there a distinction between social and academic language? Why or why not? Pause the video and have a think. Yes, there is a distinction between social and academic language. Jim Cummins is a Canadian theorist who came up with a theory of BICS and CALP, social and academic language. You'll notice the iceberg in the top right-hand corner. The social language is represented by the surface of the iceberg, what can be seen above the waterline. Social language refers to the everyday language used in social situations such as conversations, small talk, and language used in play. Social language is quickly learned, often taking 1 to 2 years. It is contextual and relies heavily on visual cues and social interactions, whereas academic language is different. Note the picture of the iceberg. You'll notice the breadth and depth of the iceberg is immense, and you can't see it from the surface of the water. Academic language is like that. It's the language needed for academic success. It's the vocabulary and language structures used in reading, writing, and discussing subjects like math, science, and literature. Academic language takes 5 to 7 or more years to develop, and it takes more time because it's abstract and it requires a deeper understanding of language and concepts acquired through intentional interactions with language and content through authentic and meaningful language learning and life experiences. This image helps us see the distinction between BICS and CALP a little more clearly. You can see the surface of the water, BICS, is the here and now. It's familiar content with face-to-face conversation, with high-frequency vocabulary and simple sentence structure, and often low pressure. CALP, however, is below the surface of the iceberg, and again, note the breadth and depth and unique shape of each iceberg. Each student would be like that. Cognitive academic language proficiency comes through experience and exposure to culture, through lectures, formal, written texts, specialized terminology, humor, culture, idioms, textbook language, social appropriateness, nonverbal communications. That takes time and experiences. There's often limited interaction where you can learn through a textbook. It might be more abstract, less familiar content, and decontextualized using low-frequency vocabulary, and often, but not always, CALP is high stakes. Part 5. Let's explore translanguaging using another one of Jim Cummins' theories, common underlying proficiency. By providing students with opportunities to access their home language, teachers can help them use their skills, prior knowledge, and experience to enhance their language development and understanding of concepts. All students come to school with literacy experiences. Home language literacy and texts, including books, music, photos, drawing, artifacts, games, and oral storytelling, can be used in the classroom to help bridge students' home language and English language literacies. Recognizing the home language literacy of English language learners values the language learning that students do outside the school setting, acknowledges their families' contributions to their literacy, and activates their prior knowledge. This gives the teachers the opportunity to recognize the home language literacy and give teachers the background knowledge for designing literacy activities to which students with different life experiences and cultural backgrounds can relate. Jim Cummins extended his theory about BICS and CALP to common underlying proficiency. You will note the image here has two icebergs. On the left, the orange iceberg represents home language, and on the right, the green iceberg represents English as an additional language. The purple section in the middle represents common underlying proficiency. Common underlying proficiency underscores the interconnectedness of language skills across the languages. By leveraging the strengths of a learner's first language, educators can better support their overall language development, leading to greater academic success in their additional languages. This concept encourages a more integrated approach to language education, recognizing the value of bilingualism and multilingualism. Common Underlying Proficiency, or CUP, suggests that language skills, such as vocabulary, grammar, and cognitive strategies, are interconnected. When a learner develops proficiency in their home language, these skills can transfer to their additional language. Additionally, the framework emphasizes that cognitive abilities, such as critical thinking and problem solving, are not confined to one language. For example, if a student learns to analyze a text in their home language, they can apply those same analytical skills when reading in their additional languages. Next, we will start to explore some variations of CUP. We will look at some images that have variations in either home language or English as additional language proficiency and their impact on CUP. You will notice that the picture on the left that we have been looking at is an adult balanced bilingual. This adult has fully developed common underlying proficiency and can go back and forth between both languages. The image on the right does not yet have fully developed CUP, or common underlying proficiency, because the learner is young. They are in a bilingual program or receiving education and instruction in English as well as their home language. They have underdeveloped common underlying proficiency because they are still learning both languages. This slide shows two images with varying proficiency in both home language and English as an additional language. The slide on the left shows fully developed home language. The orange iceberg is complete. There is developed CUP on the left-hand side, which is transferring to the person who's acquiring English. You'll note the iceberg on the English side is smaller as they are acquiring English. Common underlying proficiency shows how the adult will transfer what they know in home language to acquire English. The slide on the right is a teenage arrival. You'll note that their iceberg on the left is not yet fully developed. They are still acquiring home language in school. Therefore, they have a smaller amount of home language to transfer to English. They will still use a more developed home language to transfer and support their acquisition of English as an additional language. This slide illustrates subtractive bilingualism. You will note that the home language iceberg, the orange one on the left, is smaller and undeveloped. That is because this student is typically educated in English. Therefore, their English as an additional language, the green iceberg on the right, is growing. That means the common underlying proficiency is happening in English. Therefore, home language minimally supports English language acquisition, and the majority of the language learning for this student is happening in English. English proficiency will start to dominate. These students can be academically successful in English. However, their home language, if not kept up, will diminish significantly. We always encourage families to ensure that they are promoting use of home language where possible to maintain and develop proficiency in home language. Understanding common underlying proficiency has significant implications for teaching bilingual or multilingual students. Educators can support language development by recognizing that fostering proficiency in the home language can enhance learning in the additional languages. This highlights the importance of maintaining and promoting a student's home language in educational settings. Common underlying proficiency also considers the cultural context of language learning. Cultural knowledge and experiences from a learner's home language can enrich their understanding and use of additional languages, providing a more holistic approach to language acquisition. The following section has strategies to support translanguaging. For beginners, you can use bilingual resources, visual supports, peer support, encouraging the use of home language, and language buddies. For intermediate students, you can use translanguaging practice, showing them how to switch back and forth between both languages, cultural sharing, scaffolded writing, language journals, and supportive feedback. For advanced learners, you can use critical thinking discussions, literature connections, project-based learning, language mentoring, and encourage multilingualism. And our sixth and final part, strategies to support beginner, intermediate, and advanced proficiency EAL learners. Let's start with some considerations for instruction. Here's another opportunity to make a connection. Pause the video and think about if language is learned through explicit instruction, implicit exposure, or both. Think about or discuss the merits of each. As you may have surmised, language is learned through both direct and indirect exposure. Language is not learned through osmosis, nor is it acquired only through explicit lessons. Students need the explicit instruction making meaning with each word and language structure, and the guided practice and natural opportunities to practice language in meaningful ways in order to acquire language. Indirectly, language is learned through experience, through multiple exposures to books, videos, programs, oral exchanges, and intentional interactions in authentic ways. Directly, language is learned through direct and explicit instruction about language, vocabulary, and sentence structure and grammar. It's also learned through guided academic interactions, through reading and viewing comprehensible materials, through interacting with peers intentionally on complex academic problem solving. Vygotsky's theory of the zone of proximal development can be used to support EAL learners. The green circle in the middle represents what the learners can do independently. The yellow circle represents what the learners can do with the help of more knowledgeable others, such as teachers, parents, or peers. The white outer circle represents what the learner cannot yet do. Optimal teaching occurs in the yellow zone, the zone of proximal development, where it is slightly more challenging for the student than what they can already do, but not so far out of reach that they are unable to do the task independently. With EAL learners, both conceptual and linguistic understanding needs to be factored in. For some EAL learners, they understand the concept in their home language, but might not yet have learned the English words or structures. In this case, the language needs to be adjusted to their ZPD, and the concept can be at the grade level. Whereas for an EAL learner who has not yet learned the concept in any language, nor has the English language, they need the instruction to be in both their linguistic and conceptual ZPD. You can see how useful the zone of proximal development is for understanding EAL learners and what they can do with concepts and language. Naturally, the zone of proximal development makes us think of scaffolding for language and concept understanding. So here we have an image with a metaphor of a ladder. For teachers, do you make the next rung reachable for your students? Is the learning of the concept and language within the zone of proximal development and/or the next rung that's reachable for the students? Stephen Krashen wanted to know which theory was true, the comprehension hypothesis or the skill-building hypothesis. The comprehension hypothesis says that we acquire language when we understand what we hear or read. Our mastery of the individual components of language, those skills, are the result of getting comprehensible input. The skill-building hypothesis says that the causality goes in the other direction. We learn language first by learning the grammar rules and memorizing vocabulary. We make the rules of the new words automatic by producing them in speech or writing, and we fine-tune our conscious knowledge of grammar and vocabulary by getting our errors corrected. He wanted to know which one was true. Which one do you think is true? Through his research, Stephen Krashen found that the comprehension hypothesis is the one that is supported, that the skill-building hypothesis was limited. He, along with many other researchers, have found that grammar is best learned in context, that optimal learning occurs when it's comprehensible, understood through meaningful interactions with language. Other researchers, Swain and Suzuki, have researched interaction, output, and communicative language learning. This theory is also couched in being comprehensible and being within a learner's ZPD. It is important for learners to create oral output that stretches their linguistic capacities. They can co-create written texts with teachers and other students. However, it is important to also provide them independent writing opportunities to build meaning and express themselves. Implicit feedback, such as recasting, has some benefits, but explicit feedback is more impactful, and even more so when it is within the learner's ZPD. Scaffolding and languaging, or explaining language through collaborative pair learning tasks, is impactful also on language learning. This image is putting it all together. It shows that when the learner's ZPD in both their current levels of both language and conceptual understanding is identified, then the appropriate scaffolds and supports can be put in place. And when the learner has comprehensible input in the form of intentional interactions with both explicit instruction and implicit practice opportunities, they are then able to produce comprehensible output and share their understanding through oral and written forms. For beginning proficiency students, teachers can provide understanding and be sensitive to the demands that learning a new language is fatiguing. They can provide positive reinforcement and a low-risk learning environment, as well as multiple opportunities to review and practice. They will need resources and materials at a modified language level to support their grade level content acquisition. They will also benefit from visual and written support to oral communication that includes some sentence frame to support speaking and writing. They need engaging opportunities for students to practice and repeat language in context. For beginning proficiency students, teachers can encourage students to respond with actions pointing to visuals, using single words, keywords, memorized phrases, or familiar phrases. Basically encouraging them to communicate in a variety of ways to convey their message. Additionally, beginning students may rely on home language as a tool for English language development and understanding concepts. They can also connect with first language buddies if there are any in the class. Students are also encouraged to take responsibility for their learning and use vocabulary building tools such as reading leveled books and creating personal dictionaries. Teachers can provide intermediate EAL learners with resources that address grade level concepts with increasingly more complex language, and be sure to support that language, the vocabulary and sentence structure, with models and templates. As well, they need to model and provide feedback for cooperative learning tasks and to support meaning making for figurative language and cultural references. Teachers can encourage intermediate EAL learners to continue to build their vocabulary on their own, like by using personal dictionaries, concept maps, and to study affixes and etymology of words. They can also express their ideas and feelings with peers in conversations or journals, or use a dialogue journal to communicate with their teachers. They are encouraged to answer questions in the form of complete responses, to experiment with new vocabulary and practice more advanced language structures, to continue to read to acquire language, and to use home language as needed. For advanced EAL learners, teachers can provide support in all content areas, focusing on word analysis and understanding of implicit meaning and the nuances of the English language across all subject areas. By providing attention to the different ways in which language is used and concepts are expressed and discussed within the different disciplines or fields of study. They can also support to enhance the students' written and oral communication skills by focusing on transition words and specific vocabulary to impart precise meaning. For advanced EAL learners, teachers can encourage students to promote self-directed use of learning, engage in cooperative group work and peer tutoring, read academic texts to expand their vocabulary and concept knowledge, read for personal enjoyment to expand their understanding of various genres, and use home language as needed. We are on the home stretch. We have a few more slides to conclude our session. During this session, we talked about vocabulary, stages of language acquisition, English proficiency, the distinction between social and academic language, the importance of understanding home language proficiency in order for students to translanguage, and the importance of ZPD, comprehensible input and comprehensible output, to help decide strategies to support EAL learners at different proficiency levels. Now that we have concluded our session, you can come back to the self-reflection tool and see if you have increased your knowledge on language acquisition. Thank you for your engagement in today's session on additional language acquisition. I hope it was helpful.